Good evening. My name is Jennifer Strobbe, and I will be presenting tonight along with my coworker Caitlyn Semenek, who is a school psychologist. As you can see, I myself am a school social work clinician. Tonight we will be presenting on coping in COVID, and our presentation is geared towards the elementary years. We hope that this presentation will be able to provide you with some healthy tips and interventions that you can use with your kids and even with yourselves as we still work through the times of COVID. We presented some of these presentations last year, and they were really well received. And as we have found ourselves still living in the times of COVID and an ever-changing world, we thought that we would continue on and provide an opportunity for caregivers and parents to join and again engage in some learning and helpful tools that you could use within your home. So I hope that you find tonight's presentation helpful and engaging. We are not live, this is pre-recorded, so I would like to note that I will be providing an email address and a phone number that you can use. If you submit any questions to the email address, one of the clinicians will be getting back to you within 24 to 48 hours. And if you leave a message on the phone number that's provided, we will also get back to you as well. So I would encourage you to use that, and that will be the way that we would be able to answer questions. So I really hope that you enjoy our presentation. We're really looking forward to answering any questions that you may have, and we will now continue on. So I wanted to start off tonight just kind of highlighting a lot of the things that maybe you already know. We've been managing and coping with COVID for almost 2 years now. And some of the ongoing impacts, and I'm sure people could add to this list, I just wanted to kind of highlight here. You know, COVID has affected our relationships, roles within families. It's given us a sense of lack of control. We're not able to travel as maybe we wanted. Mourning losses has changed the access to funerals or memorials, celebrations of life. Those things have been affected. Sports as adults and kids has been affected. School and the ability to attend regularly or having to wear masks, having to isolate, peer connections have been affected. Social life, family stress and changes in jobs expectations because of longer hours for some caregivers. Some jobs being affected and caregivers losing employment because of shutdown or isolation. Our ability to cope has been affected. Our ability to celebrate milestones, graduations, holiday concerts, so many things that maybe we could celebrate before, large birthday parties, things that we could celebrate, just not being able to gather and do that. Like I spoke, having to wear masks, things being unpredictable. I know for myself, a year and a half ago or 2 years into this almost, thinking that we would still be dealing with COVID and a whole other strain was not something that I thought was going to happen. And things have just been really unpredictable and ever changing and feeling never ending, having to decide about vaccines and restrictions. So there have been so many different ongoing impacts of COVID. And what I think is really important is that we recognize that this affects us as adults and as caregivers, and it also affects our kids. So what does this mean for us, all of these ongoing impacts of COVID? How might some of us be feeling as adults and even as kids too? So some of these things that I'm going to speak of here, we feel as adults and we feel as kids. We may be more easily triggered, and we may have less ability to cope with certain situations that maybe we were able to before. We might feel burnt out or feel exhausted. We could be irritable, have difficulty concentrating, feeling isolated. You know, the neglect of self-care. Sometimes signs of burnout can be, you know, eating more unhealthy, not sleeping regularly, just those things that we do to take care of ourselves daily, we start to neglect that. The resistance to precautions and restrictions that have been caused because of COVID, resentment towards restrictions, physical symptoms as well, feeling more sick, having headaches, stomach aches, impacted sleep patterns, feeling in an overall negative mood, like this just isn't ever going to end, or Where is the fun gone in life without having to worry about things? I spoke about the lack of ability to cope, feeling scared and stressed, just being in a higher state of emotion. Again, where things maybe didn't impact you before might be impacting you now. Feeling like you're on edge and on guard and having a really hard time dealing with change or the unpredictability of our environment right now, and just experiencing negative thoughts. So these are all things that we may feel, and these are also things that our kids might be feeling as well. So I want to talk just a little bit about anxiety. In the previous slides, I spoke about things that we might be feeling, things that we might be experiencing within our bodies. And I want to tie in some of the reasons as to why this might be happening. So you understand why you might be feeling this way, but then also understanding why some of our kids might be feeling this way and why we might be saying some more difficult behaviors or behaviors that are harder to manage, or why we as caregivers might feel that we're struggling in how to manage some of these behaviors. So I'm going to just touch briefly on anxiety and what that is. So anxiety is a normal and natural built-in alarm system for perceived future threat or danger, and it can leave us feeling nervous or worried or uneasy about something that we can't predict the outcome of. It activates our fight, flight, or freeze response, and that response is a full body response that we have no control over. And anxiety can also result and present in excessive worrying and negative thinking. So what's important to understand here when we're talking about anxiety is that we have all experienced symptoms of anxiety, I would imagine, within the last 2 years. And the reason for that is because we've all experienced a perceived threat around us, which is COVID. It has caused us to be more highly activated. It has very likely activated that fight, flight, or freeze response. And as we go through the next few slides, I'm going to explain this a little bit further, but understanding why we might be feeling the way we are feeling and understanding the brain and how our body has responded to some of these triggers and has responded to COVID and the threat of COVID might be helpful in understanding ourselves, but also our kids. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain here, and I'm really simplifying this discussion for the purposes of just kind of so you understand what's happening when you're getting activated and you hit fight, flight, freeze, and what's happening with kids as well. So the downstairs part of our brain is the part of the brain that allows us to think before we act. It activates that fight, flight, freeze response. It saves our lives. When we see a car coming, it's our downstairs part of the brain that tells us to get out of the way. When we touch a hot stove, you don't think about pulling your finger away. You pull your finger away, and the downstairs brain is responsible for that. It has a very, very needed function to save lives when it needs to happen. The upstairs part of the brain is the part of the brain that we use that allows us to think before we act. It engages decision making. It gives us control over emotions in our body, allows us to feel empathy. So when we're in a state of calm, our downstairs brain and our upstairs brain can communicate. They can regulate each other. So there are times when the downstairs brain might start to get, a little high alert, but our upstairs brain can kick in and say, you know what, we don't need to go into full fight, flight, freeze response right now because this isn't a life-threatening situation, and I can help work through this, and you can manage and you can cope and you can make decisions. What can sometimes happen though, when there's been ongoing stress, ongoing unpredictability, is that the downstairs brain can become activated more often. And it can become activated when there isn't actually a real life-threatening risk around us. And what that means is that if we are activated and we're hitting that flight, fight, and freeze response more often, and even if we don't need to, it's cutting off that ability to access the upstairs brain. And then we are hitting fight, flight, freeze. And, we don't necessarily need to be doing that. So what does it mean when we're hitting fight, flight, freeze? As we know, the downstairs brain is taken over and it has kind of cut off that access to the upstairs brain. So the downstairs brain is taken over. We're in fight, flight, freeze. Again, I'm going to stress there are situations that, we need that to happen. We need to hit fight, flight, freeze. We see a bear in this situation, we run. Some would say maybe don't run from a bear, but the analogy is there. We touch the hot stove, we pull off our fingers. But what if our downstairs brain is getting activated and hitting that fight, flight, freeze response more often than we need to? What if it's getting activated even though the threats that we're perceiving around us are not life-threatening? So right here are some physical symptoms of anxiety and stress. And these symptoms can tie right into when we have been activated and we've hit fight, flight, freeze response often, or when our downstairs brain is just more activated and it's getting some of these responses going. So our pupils dilate. The brain is getting ready for the body to run or fight by releasing adrenaline. Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure is rising, your digestion slows down, so stomach aches. You start sweating, your muscles tense up. You might feel dizzy, headache or tingly, avoiding situations and isolating. You might feel stuck and you can't move, non-attendance. So again, isolating yourself. So these are all symptoms and feelings that you can have that can be tied to hitting that and getting activated into fight, flight, and freeze often. So as adults, what might we see or feel? We might not be able to participate in situations, decrease in problem solving, avoiding, insomnia, burnout, irritation, anger, chronic illness, decreased empathy or compassion. These are all signs and symptoms of ongoing stress or anxiety. So just like us, kids have certainly felt the effects of COVID as well. So just like I was explaining the brain and how we respond as adults and what we might feel as adults, kids are going to be feeling and responding in some of the same ways. So what are some of the things that we might see? And this chart kind of really talks about it here. Starting at the freeze, shutting down and breaking down and trying to hide or isolate themselves, difficulty with completing tasks, feeling zoned out, depressed, numb, the flight, wanting to run away, unfocused, hard to pay attention, hard for them to do schooling. I think that, school avoidance or, having a hard time concentrating, drops in grades, some of these things, you might be seeing. Procrastination, and the fight, just anger, outbursts, being oppositional, irritability, just a change in normal for some of our kids. It's to be expected that we might be seeing some of these things for the reason of just that heightened anxiety around COVID and the uncertainty that's around us. So like I've said, we've kind of been dealing with COVID and changes in our environment and ups and downs and just the unknowns for a significant period of time. So at this time, it's likely that we have all felt or still are feeling a sense of stress and lack of control over changes and limitations that we've just had no say over. You might feel, and our kids might be feeling like they're on high alert and that we have been for a period of time. Feeling like the rug might be pulled out from under us or that things might change or is there going to be another lockdown or all of these thoughts and these unknowns are present for us and for our kids. So what does this mean? So what it means is that it wouldn't be unexpected to think that we are or that our kids are feeling some of these ways, just given the circumstances and what our world has looked like for the past year and a half. So I really like the image of this iceberg that I came across with Parents with Confidence. And it talks about just being able to see the child as a whole. And what happens here is that sometimes we are just able to see the behavior. It's what's at the top. It's all that we're able to see. But under the surface, there's so many other things going on. And being able to understand that kids are experiencing things and there are so many factors that can influence behavior, that it's just really important to look at that and be cognizant of it and really try to understand what's feeding into that behavior and trying to meet all of the needs of our kids, and also just approaching it from a place of looking at the whole child and not just the behavior. So as we move the rest of the presentation, I know we've kind of talked a little bit about the downs of COVID and, the struggles and how we may be feeling, but now is the time where we are going to give you some tools and talk about some really positive ways to support our kids and to support your kids, but also to support yourselves through this time. So I hope that the next part of the slides and the next part of the presentation are a little more uplifting. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge previously, like in the presentation, that we are struggling and that it's okay and it's to be expected and there's reasons for it. Now, we also are going to talk about ways to support ourselves and our kids. So we're going to talk about supporting high emotions in our children. We're going to talk about daily strategies in self-care, tackling unhelpful thoughts and mindsets and mindfulness strategies. So, and how to help our kids recognize some of these emotions. And we're also going to talk about some resources as well. So one of the most important things when we're talking about supporting our kids when they're having a really hard time emotionally, or they're having an outburst, or they're just behaving in a way that's really difficult, or having a hard time, is acknowledging their feelings and being supportive and showing that empathy. And if you even just take yourself as an adult and put yourself in that situation, when you are really having a hard time, and you're really upset about something, at that moment, what can really pull you out, and I know for myself, is that somebody connects with me and says, I understand, I'm here with you, I'll help you through this. And that's what really can help me in that moment. And I think that it's really important that we're there to do that for our kids as well. So when our kids are having those really big emotions, just being able to connect and say, I understand you're overwhelmed right now, and that's totally okay. What really happened right now, that was sad and frustrating, and that might be really disappointing to you. Maybe you just need to take a break from what you're doing right now, and I'm here with you to do that. Just telling your kids, I love you and you're safe, and I'm here with you. And also when kids are crying and having those outbursts, as unreasonable as maybe we think that it is, being able to connect and show empathy and be there for them will help ground them and will help calm them, then giving you a starting point to kind of move forward in problem solving. But even just saying to your kid, I know that you are crying right now. I don't understand what you need. Can you help me understand? And I'm here with you. Some of these statements can go a really long way in just reaching your kids in those really high moments. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the do's and do nots of when you're responding to high emotions. So this is those times where your child might be completely dysregulated, might be yelling or screaming or upset, has come home and is upset about something that happened at school. As parents, you can identify, what I'm talking about when your child is in the state of high emotions, or when they've hit that fight, flight, freeze response where that in the moment their downstairs brain is taken over and there is no reasoning. They are just not in the state to be reasoned with, and they're just really having a hard time. So one of the most important things is to try to stay calm when responding. So staying regulated yourself and connecting with your child and doing so in a calm way. So not overreacting, not yelling, not escalating along with the child is really important to do. And it can be really difficult to do. So this takes some self-awareness as well. So if you do need to take a minute to calm yourself and regulate yourself, it's totally okay to do that, and to take a few breaths so you are able to not overreact or yell or behave or respond in a way that you aren't going to be happy with later. You want to respond in the moment and support in the moment as well. So what you don't want to do is continue to dwell on what happened or the behavior or the situation as the day goes on or as days go on. You want to move on. You want to respond in the moment. You want to support in the moment, work through what needs to be worked through, and then leave it there. You want to be present and stay close and be emotionally available. So that's also in regards to when you're staying calm. You want to be there with your child. You want to support them through what they're going through. You want to validate how they're feeling and encourage their feelings. You don't want to ignore them, say nothing, or say something hurtful. You want them to feel like you're there for them and that you're safe. That being said, what I always say is that if you do feel that you're escalating, if you feel like you're getting frustrated, and let's face it, this will happen, that you're recognizing that, and that you even say to your child, I need a minute right now to go take a breath, and I'm going to be right back, but I'm here for you and I will be right back. That way your child still knows that you're there for them and that you love them, and that you're not leaving them alone, but it's also showing them, hey, I need to take a break and I need to regulate. Once the behavior or the tantrum or the high emotion kind of situation has kind of diffused a little bit, discussing alternative ways to communicate, and this can be done when the child has calmed down. So discussing ways where, I know that you were really upset right there. Next time something like that happens, do you think we could talk about it? Do you think maybe you could tell me about when you're feeling angry or embarrassed or sad? And we could maybe manage this in a different way next time. And then again, just remembering that kids communicate through their behavior, which again can be really difficult. Oftentimes, kids are not trying to be angry or defiant or just to make your day terrible. That's not why they wake up in the morning. Sometimes it might feel like that, but it certainly is not their goal or their intention. They're communicating something through how they're behaving and how they're interacting. And although that can be really difficult to understand in the heat of the moment, trying to be aware of that and to help our kids recognize what they are trying to communicate and trying to get through is really important as well. So we want to be present. We don't want to shame our children for being scared or angry. We don't want to make them feel guilty. We don't want to hold on to things. We want to be there. We want to support them. We want to help them identify different ways maybe to respond or to behave differently in the future, but we also want to encourage them to share their feelings. So in the previous slides, I've really stressed kind of how, as caregivers and, when we're working with our kids, that we need to be regulated and stay calm ourselves. And that's a really tall order sometimes, because we have feelings, we have emotions. We are also going through really hard times as well. So it can be really difficult to stay regulated and to stay calm when we're struggling ourselves. So Tina Payne Bryson kind of gave, she's a psychotherapist who has her PhD. She's co-authored along with Daniel Siegel, The Whole Brain Child, The Yes Brain Child, which are great reads, and we've put them at the end of this presentation as well. But one of the strategies I came across this slide on Instagram was that she said, before you respond, if you're feeling like you are escalated or you're not in a space to respond, make sure that you get yourself there before you start responding to your child. So listing 3 things that you love about your child before you respond. Count to 10 before you respond. Take a breath. Take as many breaths as you need. Complete a body scan. So feel where you're tense in your body. And if you are feeling those tensions, ground yourself. So as silly as it sounds, like shake out your arms or jump up and down, stretch, unclench your jaw. And when you're feeling like all of these things have got you to that state of calm, then you can respond, because then you're responding to your child in a regulated way, and they are going to feed off of that. So what else can we do, and what can we incorporate in our home on a daily basis? So in a world around us where things are unpredictable and changing, trying to incorporate routine and healthy sleep patterns. If kids know what to expect, if they know how you're going to respond, if they know their chores, if they know a routine, it's going to help them manage and cope through situations that they don't have control over. So having a routine, having healthy sleep patterns, eating healthy and drinking water, these are all essentials that we need to do for ourselves and for our kids. Try not to overschedule yourselves or your kids, and read their cues. Some kids can have 3 activities a week, some may not manage that. Same as adults, we're all different, but try not to overschedule yourself. Get outside and exercise. Be cognizant of screen time for yourself and for kids as well. And be mindful of negative exposure to news and ongoing discussions. We have been in this COVID world now for almost 2 years, and you know, having ongoing exposure to negative news stories or ongoing discussions between family members of COVID, it can really have a negative impact. And maybe more negative on some and maybe less negative on others. But just being aware of the exposure, just news in general is oftentimes negative. So being aware of what we're exposing ourselves to and what our kids are being exposed to. And trying to find time to connect with your child undistracted for 10 minutes, without a phone, without the TV on. Just 10 minutes of even one-on-one time can make a huge difference in things to incorporate in the home to kind of balance out some of the difficult things that are going on. Most importantly, cut yourself some slack. If you behave or respond in a way to a behavior that was really difficult, give yourself some grace, and you aren't perfect, and none of us are. There's absolutely no shame in apologizing to your child and accepting responsibility. So if you responded in a way or acted in a way and you were like, man, I really wish that I didn't do that and I could have done that better. I wish I didn't yell. I wish I wouldn't have said that. Tell your child that. Say, I could have done that differently, and next time I am going to do this differently, and this is what I'm going to do. It can be a learning opportunity for all. It can be a learning opportunity for them to take responsibility for behaviors they wish they maybe didn't do. And by apologizing, it's building that connection back, and it's filling that bucket back up. Try not to compare yourself to others. Social media has been great in a lot of ways, but it also can be really detrimental. As a parent, if you've had a really hard day with your kid, or if your child's struggling or you're struggling, it can be really hard to look on Instagram or Facebook or social media and see all of these positive parenting moments. I can tell you that every parent out there is having some struggles right now, or does have struggles. And don't think that everybody is just managing and coping so perfectly as it might be seen on social media, because it's not the case. And you are not alone in having struggles. And these have been really difficult times. So if you need help or support, ask for it. And we have a ton of resources. There are a lot of resources in Winnipeg. So if anybody's wanting lists or anything specific, again, email to this line here, or ask your clinical team within the school as well for any resources that you might feel that you need. So next we're going to talk about tackling unhelpful thoughts, and we're kind of going to get into CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So CBT is an approach that assists us to identify and modify unhelpful thinking and problematic behaviors. So we want to increase those positive, helpful thinking patterns that help us create a healthy outlook on life and a more positive outlook on life. And we want to help identify and decrease negative and unhelpful thinking patterns that can create distress or negatively impact our outlook. So we, as adults, need to be cognizant of our thinking patterns, and we need to help our kids be cognizant of their thinking patterns as well. So the further discussion, the discussion that we're going to have now, relates to adults as much as it relates to kids. So looking at it through both lenses can be really interesting. So it's important to realize that just because we have thoughts, it doesn't make them truth. That we need to look at situations from different perspectives in different ways, and sometimes we have to ask others to help us do that, and we as adults have to help our kids do that as well. And that we have to look at how we're thinking, and that we have to make sure that our thinking is balanced and that we're not just seeing things in a negative way. So this slide here just kind of shows how CBT works, and how our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are all tied into each other. So how we think will impact how we feel and how we behave, and that there's this interconnection between our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings. So we want to work on retraining our brain. The way we think about our situation influences the way we feel and behave. So the goal of CBT is not to say think positive, rather it's to help us think more accurately in a more balanced way. And what we're going to discuss next coming up are interventions and things that we can work on with our kids. But again, I would challenge you to also think about how you could apply some of this stuff, some of these strategies to yourself as adults as well. So what's the first step that we need to do? How do we identify unhelpful thinking patterns? How do we start becoming more aware of this? So the three C's of cognitive therapy, we want to catch and identify the thoughts before they become big and impact how we behave and how we respond. We want to check those thoughts. We want to check if they're accurate. And then when we identify, if we're able to start identifying those unhelpful thinking patterns or those unhelpful thoughts, we want to check and then we want to change them. We want to reframe that. We want to start looking in a more balanced way. We want to be more accurate. We want it to become more helpful. So when speaking about unhelpful thoughts, have you ever heard your child come home and say, have you as a caregiver ever heard any of these things? Nobody likes me. Everybody always stares at me. I'm a loser. Everybody will think I'm dumb. I'll never understand this. My day's terrible. Oh, my life is going to be terrible. This week is terrible. Everybody gets it. I'm never going to get this done. Have you ever heard all of these negative comments? And we all get stuck in a place sometimes, but have you heard as a caregiver your kids coming home and saying some of these things? So if you answered yes to the previous slide, that you have heard your child think that or say those things, or if you, even as an adult, have said those things, you certainly are not alone. All of those things would fall under some of these categories of negative thinking patterns. And the first step of catching those unhelpful thoughts is becoming aware of them. So there's actually categories here that we're going to talk about in regards to negative thinking patterns. So there's catastrophizing, minimizing, jumping to conclusions, personalization, negative self-labeling, all or nothing thinking. So, the thought that everything has to be perfect or else it's a failure. I scored the game-winning goal, but anybody could have done it. I'm pretty sure he hates me. I can just tell how he said my name. Jumping to conclusions. No one is looking at me. They must hate my new shirt. So all of these things would be categorized as negative thinking patterns. And helping identify some of these areas with kids and even identifying them for ourselves is the first step in being able to challenge that and actually start reframing some of this. So some more common thinking errors and unhelpful thoughts: absolute thinking. I never get this answer right. I will never get it, or I always will come in last. Exaggerated thinking. My milk got spilt at lunch and everybody saw it, and I will never drink milk at lunch again. Everybody will think that I'm a loser. Mind reading. They didn't ask me to play today, so everybody must hate me. Perfectionism. If I can't do it right, I'm not going to do it. I will never learn. And predicting the future. I heard that this class is hard, so I know that I will never pass. So now that we've identified some of these unhelpful thinking patterns and these negative thinking patterns, how do you help challenge and reframe that? How do you help kids get out of that? How do you help them become aware? How do you help them see things differently? And that can be really hard because it's a pattern. And as we train ourselves and we train our brain to see things differently and respond in one way, it takes effort to retrain ourselves. It takes effort to see things differently. It takes effort for adults and it takes effort for kids to do it too. So things that you can say to your child, or even say to yourself sometimes when you're finding yourself having these thoughts or when you're hearing your kids saying these things, is, would you think that about your friend? What you're saying right now, would you think that about your friend? Would you talk to somebody else the way that you're talking to yourself right now? Do you think that you're being too hard on yourself? So fact finding, what actually happened that you think that? Asking your child, if somebody did the same thing that you just did, what would you think or what would you do? Asking if what you're thinking is true, what would that mean? So what's the worst case scenario? Even though if you did spill your milk and everybody stared at you, what's the worst case scenario that could come of that? And identifying that and working through that with them. What is the worst thing that could happen, even if what you are thinking is true? So very similar to the previous point. And how can we look at this a different way? How can we look at this situation? How can we look at this, you know, if somebody passed you in the hall and didn't say hi, how can we look at it a different way? Why does it automatically mean that they didn't like you or they don't like you anymore? What else could be going on for that person? So bringing in different perspectives. So just really helping your child challenge some of those thoughts and catch them and reframe them and give different ways and different perspectives of looking at it. And here's a slide that kind of also speaks to challenging those automatic negative thoughts, those thoughts that are just popping in the head. The first thing, like I said, is becoming aware of that, being aware of it as an adult, but helping your student or your children and our students being aware of it as well. So, challenging some of these thoughts that they're saying, nobody cares, I always get in trouble, I'm a loser. So how do we challenge these again? What's a more helpful thought you could have right now? What's another possibility? Other than what you're saying is the worst case scenario, what's another possibility? What would the people that care about you think? And what would they say to you right now? What's the worst thing that could really happen? And we talked about that in the other slide as well. So getting kids to say to themselves, if my friend had this thought, what would I tell them? And how do I know that what I'm thinking right now is 100% sure? How do I know that this is true? And if the worst really did happen, what could I do to deal with it? And who could help me? So having your child ask themselves that, even asking yourself that, and then help problem solve that with them. Take that unknown away, take that fear away. And what's the best possible outcome? So again, exploring options, providing options and alternatives, but really helping your child understand these negative thoughts and then challenge them and help problem solve that.
Now, the precursor to challenging negative thoughts and replacing them is to first recognize these thoughts. You have to catch yourself red-handed to be able to stop yourself and start replacing the negative thoughts with more positive ones. So in order to first recognize and then evaluate our own thoughts, this requires self-awareness. It's important to realize that self-awareness and our self-concept are very complex and very complicated. As you can see here, there's a multitude of things to consider when we're considering ourselves. So our little ones need help navigating all of this, and sometimes this help needs to be very explicit. We need to really spell it out for them. So what is self-awareness? Well, simply put, it's becoming aware of oneself. So for our children, this means knowing how their strengths, their weaknesses, and how their personality affects their choices and also affects the way that they treat the people in their lives. And I've added an image here from the movie Inside Out. And for those of you who haven't seen this one yet, I highly recommend watching it with your kids. Sit with your kids while they watch it, provide commentary during the movie, talk about it afterwards. This is a really great movie in that it takes a very abstract concept and it makes it more concrete for our kids, which helps us talk about it. So how do our kids learn to be self-aware? Well, the number one way in which they pick up on this concept is from you, from us, from their parents, from their grown-ups. So it's very important that we act as role models in this regard. And this goes back to what I said earlier about being explicit and spelling it out for them. So use everyday moments to show your children how you are handling your emotions. When you're experiencing big emotions like anger and frustration, say perhaps one of your children is refusing to brush their teeth in the morning, you're already running late, this is the third day in a row that it's happened, you're having big feelings. Talk about those with your kids and also talk about what you're planning on doing to overcome them. So say to your kids, I am getting very upset right now. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm going to leave the room and I'll come back when I'm calm. Now this might feel silly or cheesy to be narrating your own thoughts like this, but the more you do it, the more natural it starts to feel, and it really is a very effective way to show them how to manage these big feelings. So part of managing these big feelings is learning how to express the big feelings. So I've shared here 2 ways in which we can help our kids learn to express their feelings. The first of which is the I statements. So having your child say something like, I feel mad when my sister hit the back of my head. This helps your child understand how the outside world and their external experiences affects their internal state or their emotions. Another one is to do a bug and a wish. So you teach your kid to say, "It bugs me when you interrupt me. I wish you would wait till I finish." So again, we're allowing our kids to label what they're feeling and connect it to what's going on in the physical world around them. Another way kids can learn to become self-aware is by coming up with solutions to their own problems. Oftentimes when kids face a predicament, they look to us to fix it, and we often do. However, this can lead to something called learned helplessness. They might start to feel like they need us to fix things for them. And we want them to feel capable of fixing things on their own. We want them to be confident that they have the tools they need to handle whatever life throws at them. So instead of jumping in to rescue our kids, let your child work it out on their own sometimes. An example of this would be when we, as grown-ups, lock our keys in the car. This is almost immediately a stressful situation for all of us. Now imagine if you've also locked your phone and your wallet in the car. That feeling of being helpless, of not having the tools that we need to solve the problem in front of us. This is going to evoke a much higher stress response. So we want our kids to have those tools that they need to solve their problems. And to do this, to help our kids become more effective problem solvers, there's a few things we can do. We can help our kids learn to pause before reacting to a situation and first just identify what the problem is. Next, we can ask our kids to show us what the hardest part of the problem is. And this encourages them to break the problem down into smaller chunks. So now they'll break a big problem down into smaller problems that they perhaps feel more capable of tackling. You can also become your child's emotion coach, and you'll do this by naming and validating their feelings and also helping them to process their emotion and brainstorm solutions. Self-reflection is another really important piece here, and this is the act of setting aside time every day to look at yourself as a person and whatever roles you fill. So for example, with my girls, their self-reflection time would acknowledge their lives as sisters, as students, as friends, as daughters, and as energetic little girls. This act of reflecting in that way encourages them to see themselves from different perspectives. And for those of you that have perhaps some older kiddos at home, there is an abundance of life journals that are available now for kids of various ages. And what these include are daily prompts to help your child reflect on their day, their interests, or their experiences. Now, you don't need to buy a journal to do this. This can be something that you just simply do at bedtime every day. Talk to your child about their day. Ask them to reflect on parts of their day. Did something make you laugh today? What was it? Did you help somebody? Why did you choose to help that person? Did anything upset you today? How did you feel when you got upset? Questions like these can be really helpful to help our children just reflect, take a moment and think about their day and how they feel about their day. Now, the last one I have down here is help our children understand their own brains. In terms of understanding their brains, Jen gave a nice overview earlier of the upstairs brain, downstairs brain analogy. Now, this might seem to you to be too complicated to explain to your child, but you'd be surprised how much they can actually grasp when we talk about our brains. And learning about their own brain only helps them to understand their own feelings and thoughts better, and this leads to better self-awareness. And there are lots of videos out there that have this information presented in very kid-friendly ways. I'll attach a link to one of my favorite videos in the resources at the end of this presentation. And I would really urge all of you to check it out because even though it's aimed at kids, it's actually a really great way to help solidify this concept for the parents as well. For most of us, this is not something that we talk about on a regular basis, so brain talk is not something we're fluent in. And the more exposure we have to this information, the better able we will be as parents to interpret our children's emotional responses. So now that we've talked about what self-awareness is and how we can really foster this in our children, I want to just kind of go over some of the benefits of self-awareness. So when kids are self-aware, they are able to understand themselves in relation to the world around them. Besides learning who they are as a person, self-awareness helps them dig a little deeper and to decode how their emotions impact what they do. And that right there is the key, figuring out how our emotions impact what we do. And that goes for grown-ups as well. That can be really hard. It sounds simple, but in reality, it can be very challenging. So helping our children develop that skill at a young age is only going to help them in the long run. So here we have listed some of the more notable benefits of self-awareness, including higher levels of emotional intelligence, the ability to empathize and be more compassionate and kind. It will help develop better communication and listening skills, and also develop those critical thinking skills. It will also improve their ability to make better decisions. It will lead to stronger relationships and also better leadership skills. Back at the beginning of the presentation, Jen spoke about the ongoing impacts of COVID that we have all been living with for the past year and a half. It's important that we take time to really consider how have we been responding to all of this? How have we been responding to these added worries, the new stresses in our lives, and the increase in anxiety that we have maybe experienced? We have all experienced this pandemic differently, and we all experience our own emotions differently. So it makes sense that coping with COVID will look different for everyone. I want to take this last bit of time with you to share some information on mindfulness. Not only is it a great way to cope with stress in our lives, but it can also be preventative in that incorporating mindfulness into your life and your child's life will help guard against future stress and anxiety. Mindfulness, in its simplest form, is paying attention to what is happening in the present moment. It may be what you're feeling, what you're hearing, or anything else that you notice. It's not about clearing your mind, it's just an honest look at what you're experiencing in this moment. So often, as adults, our mind is elsewhere, whether it's on our phones at the dinner table, or thinking about something you have to get ready for tomorrow, or dwelling on something that happened 2 weeks ago that's still bothering you. And this all takes us away from what is happening in the present moment. So the following are some strategies that you can use to help keep yourself present in the moment, in the right now. And the great thing about mindfulness is that it's so accessible. You can do it, your kids can do it. You can engage in mindfulness at work, at home, in line at the grocery store. You don't need equipment. There's no booklets required. You and your kids can use mindfulness to help work through big feelings wherever and whenever you need to. The first strategy I want to share with you is called grounding. This one's really great to do with kids, but also grown-ups too. Feel free to engage in grounding. And what you do here with this one is you stay still, whether you're sitting, standing, laying down, you stay still. And you go through all 5 of your senses and you count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you're going to name 5 things that you can see. You're going to name 4 things that you can touch. Then 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And you can mix these up too if you want, and especially if you are doing this with kids. If they want to name 5 things they can smell and 1 thing they can touch, that's okay. Just work your way through the 5 senses and count it down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what this does is it really connects you back to the physical world around you. So if you or your child is feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling some anxious thoughts coming on, this stops and connects you back to the physical world around you. It helps take you out of those negative thoughts. It resets us and it grounds us back in our present moment, or the environment around us right now. The next strategy we're going to talk about is progressive muscle relaxation. This is a really good one to do right before bed for children because it helps kind of get rid of that last little burst of energy that they may have in their bodies. So what you're going to ask them to do is just lay down, and you can either work yourself from the bottom to the top or top to the bottom. I usually start at the bottom, so you with their toes. So you would tell them to breathe in and clench your toes as tight as you can and hold that for about 10 seconds. And then breathe out. And when they breathe out, they relax the muscle. Then you would work your way up the body, so move on to the calf and say, okay, now breathe in and clench your calves. Hold those muscles as tight as you can for about 10 seconds, and then breathe out and release the muscles. So you work yourself all the way up to their face. And then once you've done every muscle group individually like that, you would do one last round where you have them tense every muscle in their body. So breathe in and clench all your muscles, hold them as tight as you can for 10 seconds, and then breathe out and relax everything. And this leaves their body feeling really physically calm. This is another good one to really force you into the moment, into the present moment, because you have to pay attention to your muscles. So it takes your mind off of whatever other negative thoughts you were maybe having or anything else you were worrying about at that moment. And the last one we're going to talk about today is deep breathing. Now, I know deep breathing gets talked about a lot, but it's important to understand that when done right, deep breathing actually sets off a chain reaction in our bodies. So the physical motion of our lungs expanding and contracting stimulates a nerve in our body called the vagus nerve. And this is the nerve that tells the rest of our body to calm and rest. Now, if we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, this is a very important message to get. So once our body starts getting this calm and rest message, then the upstairs brain can reactivate. And if we remember what the upstairs brain does, the upstairs brain is in charge of our rational thought. So we need to reactivate this part of our brains to help us return to a more calm state. And the deep breathing is a big part of that. Now, there are lots of resources that you can find on the internet, pictures like this that help us show children how to engage in deep breathing and help us get kids kind of interested in deep breathing. There's also, I've shared here a picture of Zen Den. So there is a YouTube channel called Cosmic Kids, and this person does yoga for kids online, which is also a great thing to try out if you've never tried that. But they have also now started doing something called Zen Den. So they will go through these deep breathing exercises with your child on the TV. So it's a really great way to get your kid kind of engaged in these deep breathing activities. And so I'll attach a link to that channel, to that video, at the end of the presentation in the resources.
So that takes us to the end of the presentation tonight. I would love to thank you all for being here. It was our pleasure to put this together for you. Before we end, I do want to provide you with a list of resources here that you can access. Please know that there are so many resources out there that we couldn't possibly list all of the great ones, but these are some of the favorites that Caitlyn and I came up with. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is that if you are looking for more resources, please reach out to your schools, your clinicians within your school, or use the email address and phone number that you're going to be provided with in the next slide to reach out, where Caitlyn and I or one of our other clinicians can get back to you and provide you with more information. So again, please feel free to contact us if you would like any more information on this topic, and I would encourage you to check out the resources we've listed below. So as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we had pre-recorded this. So what I have done here is I've attached our Staying Well email address and phone number. This is the email address that you can use should you have any questions, concerns, or comments about tonight's presentation. We will get back to you within a few days and reach out to touch base. And if you would need to use the number that is listed below, you are more than welcome to do that as well and leave a message, and somebody will always get back to you within approximately 24 hours. So thank you again so much for being here with us. It was our pleasure to put this together. I hope you all stay well, and looking forward to having another opportunity to do this again. Thank you again so much. Bye-bye.